We're going to begin by talking about our dynamics effects category. So dynamic effects are anything that have to do with amplitude, or if you want to think about it even easier, anything that's dealing with volume. Just because you call it a dynamic effect versus a volume effect, maybe it makes you sound a little bit smarter, but at the end of the day, it's important to understand what these things are actually doing. So we're going to start by talking about gain staging of just recordings and samples. So when they're brought in different places and locations where you're going to change the gain and why you might want to do that and when you may not want to do it. So for a lot of people, they get tripped up on gain staging and on like fader controls because they're thinking about it from a very simplistic perspective. And it's like the logical perspective that a lot of us would have, myself included. You think, okay, if this is too loud, I'll just turn it down. If it's too quiet, I'm just going to turn it up. Should be as simple as that, right? Well, in some ways, yes, but in other ways, no. So we're going to make that distinction and some of those distinctions in this video. And then actually at the very end of this week, we're going to have another review and go through a full example of talking about signal flow and where to be keeping an eye on levels. And hopefully after going through this week, a lot of that will make sense to you. And you actually then might be a few stages ahead of a lot of people who've never really thought about this beyond just something being loud or soft. So in the digital domain, when we record digitally, there is a limit, right? Like you have to set boundaries for something to be digital for a program. There has to be a boundary level at some point. And in the computer and with digital audio, that boundary is at this 0 dB mark. So we can see that we are going backwards, 0, -4, -8, -12. But 0 is as loud as we can record up to. But it's still possible to kind of cross that threshold. You're not literally crossing it, as in you're not going above 0 to then record at +1 or +2, but the computer and the preamp and the analog to digital converter is kind of saying no more. This is the most energy that we can take at this point to try and represent this signal, but that energy still exists if you are pushing it too hot. And with that extra energy, it needs to be redistributed somewhere, and that redistribution of energy is actually what is the form of digital distortion. So I've done a really irresponsible recording right here, which is full of digital distortion, but you'll notice that nowhere on here are our meters going to be peaking out in red or anything like that. So it's a worrying sign. Digital distortion recording. Digital distortion recording. When I was setting my preamp stage, I never saw red anywhere. I thought that this was going to be a completely clean recording, but obviously it isn't, because if we look in here, we can see that there are parts to this signal where it's being squared off. And this isn't like natural. You don't want to see any squaring off. You want to make sure that it looks nice and wavy. That's a technical term there. Nice and wavy all the way throughout the signal. And what makes this even worse is that if I turn the volume down, if I go in here and I adjust the clip gain and I bring this down by 6, it still has that cutoff there. And if we go back and listen to it, digital distortion recording, digital distortion recording. You can see that it's still showing us here a -6. This looks like it's a totally safe level, but we still have that extra distortion that's built into the signal. And in a digital system, you can't get rid of that. If you record too hot, you've recorded too hot. And that's the big difference between digital and analog. Digital is incredibly precise. It can be so precise that it gets you into trouble like this, because if you were looking at it and you were seeing, oh, okay, I'm not seeing any red anywhere, I should be good to go. I shouldn't have any problems. It can be misleading. And that was a problem when that switch actually occurred from like analog to digital, because with an analog system and recording to tape, you have inherent mechanical noises. For example, the tape hiss sound. And you don't want to hear the tape hiss if you're making a recording. So you're going to turn it up to a point where that signal to noise ratio is really good and you're not hearing any of the tape hiss and you're just hearing the instrument. So people would push signals really hard into the tape because there's no boundary. There's no like 0. All it's going to do when it reaches and gets too hot is it's going to compress that signal. It's going to fit it in there. And by doing that, you actually are then eliminating some of that tape hiss sound. But with digital, it's exactly the opposite. you're not having to worry so much about a signal to noise ratio unless there's like a fan or something in the background of your noise or the heating system is really loud. If you're in a nice and clean room, you can record, or I should just say, not a very noisy room, a very quiet room. You can actually take that digital signal and you can turn it up afterwards, and you're not going to be bringing up any additional tape hiss. You're only bringing up what's actually been recorded. So if we go and listen to this safe recording here, safe level recording, you can see that we have all this headroom at the top and at the bottom, and I can actually take this and I can turn it up. I can probably turn it up even 12. Maybe that's extreme, but if I listen back to it, it's not like a worse recording. It still sounds good. Safe level recording, right? So I'm very happy with that. But with this one, even if I go in here and I turn it down really low, we're always going to hear that digital distortion. Digital distortion recording.